Welcome to the Shared Practices Podcast, Season 6 on growth. We have Dr. George Hariri back. George, how's it going, man?
Good. Is this the intro, Richard?
This is the intro. We're not doing intros and outros.
This is intro, and then we'll cut to the interview, and then we'll do the outro, right?
This is all one deal.
I
That's
think
how
we
we
need
roll
to
now.
we need to tell the audience when we're getting into the interview. This is the intro still.
Okay, fine.
We'll do it for fun.
We'll let you know when the intro is over. So, since our last recording, we recorded in person for the beginning of this growth season, and then we were in Monterey, California.
Yes.
We did not catch fire. The fires were before and after we were there, so that was
Were they
good.
really?
Oh yeah, like it was a smoky mess the week before we were there.
I feel like I didn't notice any of these fires.
No,
And I was in Folsom, and it was very smoky, and I still barely noticed.
yeah. No, we were in Monterey. We did a shared practices talking about growth. We did a quarterly meeting. And there was 13 people in that Airbnb between team members and spouses or girlfriends or fiancés. And pretty phenomenal meeting. Came out with a lot of clarity and a lot of potential. So it was amazing.
Yeah, I had a good time with those 2 days. Those 2 awesome days that we had there together. Really amazing.
Yeah, good things to come. We can't talk about. I feel like we're always saying that, but that's the case.
Yeah,
So,
as always.
cool.
But I think one thing that happened pre Monterey, which is what sparked this episode. We're still in the intro. We'll hop to the interview soon.
Okay.
What sparked this interview was I called Richard, and I said it had been so in my practice. A little backstory is I back in like May, I think, right post COVID. COVID gave me a lot of time and space, and one thing that I really came back from COVID feeling was I don't want to be a dentist as much as I have been,
Right.
which is an interesting realization to make over COVID, right? I always viewed myself as a high producing owner that was just going to high produce in short time and then have an associate or two after that.
Right.
I think the thing that I realized over COVID with that space was that I don't want to produce either. And so
Yeah.
I hired another dentist, and she started at the beginning of August, which for me, I called Richard at the end of August and I said, Richard, I have had more staff troubles and more things go wrong in my practice in the past month than I've had in my entire career as an owner.
Well, but here's the thing is that not only did you have more problems, it's also concentrated into the small time that you're in the office physically.
Which it probably wasn't more issues, but I just got them all at once. It was an adjustment for me because I went from being there 2 days a week to being there for realistically 3 hours a week.
Right.
And so it's like all 3 hours I'm dealing with stuff.
Right.
And it was
which is my world and my schedule. I mean, ironically, right now we're at a weird spot where George and I both have the exact same dentistry schedule, and I've even lined up my clinical days to be in line with your schedule. So Wednesday,
so we can schedule things for shared practices
time
together.
where I'm seeing patients. It's also your time that you're seeing patients. So then other days we don't conflict and we can meet and coordinate everything.
But it's funny because this is the way a multiple practices ran. Right? Like you go there a half day a week. If you have 3 or 4 of them, you kind of go a half day a week. Right. And I just only happen to have one. And I have 2 other practices called shared practices.
Right.
But it's this interesting thing where I called Richard and I was like, Richard, you get this. I hate this. I want to throw it at a wall and throw it in the trash and be done with it.
Yeah.
And then, I had time to sit and reflect, and I realized, and this is, I think, the thing you helped me realize was that as you grow, you have new problems and things break, and you have to get used to he goes, welcome to your new problems, George. And I said, thanks, Richard. And now, it's been 3 weeks since that conversation, and I'm much more acquainted with my new problems. And I went back into my practice and I put a lot of structures in place to make sure that these 3 hours go a lot more smoothly for me.
Right.
But I think this was meant for an episode where you and I talk about, the stages of growth and a lot of the issues that, because you walked right into this situation, right? You went from 0 to 3 practices overnight. I went from 6 employees to 15 employees.
Right.
And I can distinctly remember like 4 or 5 times where the management got a lot harder. And so I kind of wanted to use this interview to talk about each of those times, because it's very typical from like a solo to group progression, where then you can sort of see the things that break down and then the things you do to kind of navigate through that breakdown.
Okay, great.
Um,
So I think we should start then back with the beginning of like,
well, now let's jump to the interview. That was the intro.
okay,
We're gonna hop to the interview. We're gonna hear an ad, and then we're gonna jump right in.
and here we go. This episode is brought to you by Swell. So all of us who are already using Swell know that it crushes reputation management. It's like turning on a steady stream of reviews that requires no effort from your team and just works. It's amazing. Additionally, it makes it easy to stay in touch with all of your patients before and after their visits. And it even has a great way to set up a virtual waiting room. But there's more good news. Swell has a brand new version of their platform. And on top of being simpler than ever to use, you can now actually get patients to pay via mobile, which is incredible. The reason that Swell is so effective at getting reviews is they make it easy. They've now brought that same ease of use to paying for dental treatment even after patients have left the office. Mobile payments are a great way to text them a reminder so they can pay at their convenience right on their phone. You can pay via credit or debit card, ACH, or even Apple Pay or Google Pay with just a few taps. No more phone calls, no more chasing people down with emails and letters that always seem to get lost. And it gets better. This new release includes Swell Schedule, which is an easy way for patients to request an appointment time that works for them, so you can lock down those appointments quicker. Listen, Swell is one of those things that you just need to try it out, turn it on, see the results, and then you're converted and you're like, well, I'm never going to shut this off. Listeners of the Shared Practices podcast can try Swell for free for 30 days. No commitment. Just set it up, see the results for yourself before you pay anything. To take advantage of this offer, head to swellcx.com/sharedpractices. That's swellcx.com/sharedpractices.
Okay.
Interview.
Okay.
Let's go back to George straight out of school
Ah, jeez.
with a practice on your hands. I bet your problems felt very clinical at the time.
Oh man, Richard, I walked into my practice and I told the story on air before. Like, this two distinct moments of my life where I was like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? That's the
Right.
censored version of what I said. Was I held
Thank
my
you.
son for the first time. My first time realizing I'm a parent was
Right.
extremely overwhelming.
Yeah.
I was 23 at the time, and I had a child. And walking into my practice as a 25-year-old was, I'm 25. I graduate dental school tomorrow. I'm meeting my staff today.
Right.
What did I get myself into? And the very first roadblock I had, I think, is a very basic one that most people have. Obviously, dentistry was hard. Like, we won't even get into that. That's like a whole nother thing that,
Yeah.
quite frankly, don't want to talk about. But
You're over.
yeah, it's okay now. But yeah, that, like, getting comfortable with clinical stuff is, I think most of our audience, they'll do that on their own. They don't really need us for that.
Right.
But I think the first baby level of leadership is having difficult conversations with staff.
Mm.
Like, for example, a staff member comes late, or they are uncomfortable with, or they're not presenting fluoride, or they are not taking intro photos the way you want them to.
Mm.
Right? These are very like solo dentist problems. Like,
Stuff is, the setup for the procedure is not correct. And so they're having to
yes,
get up and leave and go get something else. And it's delaying you and it's frustrating. And it's like, do I bring it up right now? Do I bring it up at the end of the procedure? Do I bring it up at the end of the day?
like, you
And
don't want to make them feel bad. It's very uncomfortable, and that's like baby level 101 leadership
right.
of like handling these very basic conversations. But at the time, I'm 25. I've never done this before. They were very uncomfortable.
And I don't. There's like a certain point where those conversations, I don't know if they become more comfortable or dentists just become less patient. And so, like, before they were like, oh, I'm very understanding because before I didn't have a good assistant. Now I have a good assistant. I don't want to hurt their feelings. They get to the point where they're just like impatient with everyone and are very willing to voice their concerns, whereas before they were not.
Well, a common theme of this episode, and I think the whole season, is the personal growth that you go through, right? I mean, like, we're talking about this very basic leadership issue. We'll kind of scale up to like guide more present day leadership issues. But they every step of the way is very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's not like if I have to go have one of those conversations with my staff member, like I'm not going to feel super uncomfortable now, but I felt uncomfortable like 100 times. And every time is like a little bit less uncomfortable, but it's still like
Mm.
slightly uncomfortable even 100 times later. The
Yeah.
skill isn't finding some magical way to not make it uncomfortable. The skill is doing it anyway.
Right.
Are you able to do the uncomfortable thing in spite of the fact that it's uncomfortable? This people think the skill is like, let me find a way to make this comfortable. It's like, no.
Right. No. Holding people accountable is never comfortable.
Yes.
Correcting people when they do their job incorrectly is never comfortable.
So I'll flip it on you, Richard. Now you've owned 3 practices for a year now, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. May 2019.
so a year and 4
Over a year.
months, 16 months. So are there things that make you uncomfortable now still?
Oh, totally. And I
Yeah.
suck at this still. Like, here's the thing is that you had the chance to be in the office and like I've been in the office not enough to like have seen these issues come up and be efficient and just deal with these on a constant basis. So I still suck at this. This is still very uncomfortable for me.
But the things that made you uncomfortable 16 months ago, probably different things that make you uncomfortable today.
Very different.
But you're
And
still uncomfortable.
still uncomfortable.
Yes.
Yeah. And still not great at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that as you grow, your problems change. And like your practices might not have grown as much like in size, but you've grown as a leader
Right.
by owning them for 16 months. And so
Correct.
naturally, like your problems will change and the things that make you uncomfortable, and they'll start leveling up in leadership. And go ahead.
I also think that over time, the scale of uncomfortableness, you'll eventually start hitting some bumps that are way more uncomfortable than the simple
Yes.
correcting people for doing stuff that's wrong. And COVID for me was one of those things. I mean, we don't like to talk about COVID a ton on the show anymore, but once you shut your whole practice down and you have to have a whole 2 weeks worth of awful difficult conversations, and then you start it back up and you have another 2 to 3 weeks of awful conversations and convincing people and talking people and trying to figure out the best path forward. Then a lot of the little things you're like, nah, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just takes some thickening of skin is more than a leveling up of skill of realizing, okay, in the context of things, this isn't that big of a deal, and your capacity to not freak out over smaller things changes over time.
Well, I think that's what I would define as leveling up a skill, is your ability to have that thicker skin and to handle more chaos. As my practice has gotten bigger, we have 15 people now that work for me in my practice. And at some point, something is going on with any given one of them. Like,
Yes.
there's 15. Like, let's just say there's like a 5% chance that something is wrong with a person at any given moment. If you got 6 people, that means once every 3 months you're dealing with something.
Right.
But if you got 15 people, you're dealing with something all the time.
Totally.
And so it's your ability to thicken skin, like Richard said. The skill is your ability to remain calm while things are going wrong.
Absolutely.
It's not to make it so that nothing ever goes wrong.
Yeah. And it's a human business. I think that's another part that you realize over time, that it's just a lot of the problems aren't that like someone is being like misbehaving or not doing their job. A lot of times the problem is that like something major and awful or difficult has come up in their life that then is creeping into their job. And there's this balance of supporting them and, figuring a workaround, and then you multiply that with, just human drama and interactions and difficulty between employees. And sometimes you're patient with the stuff that's happening in someone's life, but it drags on for months and months and months and months. And then you get to this point where, okay, now you're not performing your job to a certain standard and it's affecting others around you. And they're having to pick up the slack for long periods of time. And those become, do we keep this person or do we move on? Do we, what do we do? Those are some of the harder decisions that aren't as straightforward compared to calling someone out for being late.
Yeah, and like the only reason those are your problems is because, and let's go back to the initial conversation we had, is because you have a lot of leadership levels in place already. You have systems in place, you have accountability structures in place, and so then like those are the problems that never go away, right? There's no system that makes sure that staff have stable lives outside of the office. Like that, I
Right,
don't have a solution for. Uh,
right.
you can try to hire people that have stability in their life, but like even then, like deaths in family and stuff, it all
Okay.
happens.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back to that conversation because we never really gave, like, if there's a solo practice owner listening, and I only say solo practice owner because if you own a group practice, you most likely are comfortable with this conversation. But like somebody out there, right? Like a common one for me, let me remember one that may be uncomfortable. Um, Asking somebody to do something. I feel like for me, adding something new to their appointment or their schedule was uncomfortable at the beginning,
Which is hilarious to me because
especially hygiene.
okay, you are great at delegating and asking people to do stuff. So if it's hard for you, it's definitely gonna be hard for the rest of us.
Well, I said uncomfortable at the beginning, right?
Okay.
This is like you don't at the beginning. I didn't delegate a whole lot,
Right.
um, and so I had a client, and he had an issue with I think we've talked about it on air, James, with delegating clinical notes.
Mm.
And I'll use the example of how we talked about it with him and how we talk about it in Mastermind and everything um, with all of our clients. Is you have this conversation like this where you go, I always start with the reason why I'm making the request.
Mm.
So like if we'll do the assistant one and then I'll do the hygienist with intro photos. But with the assistant, it was, you know, you go up to the assistant and say, "Hey, blank, I got a lot going on right now, and I'm falling behind on a lot of the things I need to do as part of owning this practice. A lot of my administrative work, a lot of paying bills, and I'm staying late after hours to do that. One thing that I would really help me out is if you took some of the burden off of my plate with some of the things that you could potentially do, so that I don't have to stay late and miss time with my family and kids. Are you on board for that idea?" Most employees will be like, "Yeah, that seems reasonable."
Right.
And then you get to the thing you're asking them of, "Can you help me with clinical notes?"
Mm.
I think people just go, "Can you do my clinical notes?" And they leave out the whole reason why they need that in the first place.
Right.
And that the reason why they're saying yes isn't because, um,
They want to do extra work.
yeah, it's because they want to help you in your life.
Right.
And so they're willing to do the extra work if they understand the greater purpose of it or the cause of the delegation.
So, start with why, Simon Sinek, if
Yeah.
they're bought in with why this needs to happen, then they're on board to help you figure it out, even if it's hard and even if they have to do extra things and there's a lack of clarity, they'll figure it out.
So I'm moving my practice. I think I've talked about it a little bit here and there. We're moving to a bigger office in a couple years, and at some point, I have to make the switch from Dentrix to Open Dental
Mm.
because it's going to crash. Like Dentrix on 50 computers or 60 computers is going to crash all day, every day. It's just such a clunky software. At least
Right.
that's my perception of my technical situation. I don't want an IT guy emailing me something, but so I've had to tell my team, and I didn't start by saying we're switching to Open Dental. I
Right.
started with, when we move to the new practice, we're going to have 60 computers. And if we stay on Dentrix, it's going to keep crashing.
Right. Is
So,
it crashing a fair amount right now?
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's slow as all
I'll
get
get
out.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, so it's super slow. And so then I tell my staff, like, we can't have 60 computers on this really slow practice management software. You guys would go nuts. Now they're on board. Say at
Right.
some point in the next 2 years, we got to transfer to Open Dental. It's going to be very annoying. It's going to be a new thing, but at the same time, it has to happen. Now they're all on board because they don't want that situation that I'm trying to prevent as well.
Right. I love that. And on top of that, you can also preface that with, and we could wait until we move to the new office, but then we're learning a new system and scaling up and restarting. So if we actually learn it now, then we're going to be ahead of the curve. And it's just going to be, okay, we already know this. Now let's do it with more computers.
So now, and my team right now, we're all brainstorming on when is the best time to do the conversion. Is it when we move so that like we have all the chaos at once, or is it pre that and then it's 2 points of chaos? And so we're all kind of internally, they're all debating about it. And it's not like we're debating about it nonstop. We're just kind of all poking around at the idea of like, hey, when do you think? And then
Right.
we'll all agree on the best time to switch, and then we'll switch.
Right.
But we've all co-created that solution.
Nice.
Um, so now back to the hygienist thing. I think I'm going to switch it up from intraoral photos to reappointment rate, but I think the same principle could apply.
Okay.
I think one thing that um, people have a hard time with is asking their hygienist to get a higher reappointment rate.
Hmm.
And so one thing that I'll tell hygienists, I'll say, you know, um, when a patient leaves without their next appointment, there's a 10% chance that they come back on time. Like that's a stat.
Mm,
And I say, we always want to make sure we're doing our best job to make sure our patients are right back on time, clean mouths, and we're taking care of them. And then you're seeing them every 6 months repeatedly. Every hygienist can agree with that statement.
totally.
I say the way that we do that is we make their next appointment. If we don't make their next appointment, 10% chance they don't come back on time. And if we try making it up front, they don't make it nearly as often. So it needs to be done in your chair before that patient leaves as much as possible. And I'd really like it to be more than whatever percentage of the time. And then I'll report it to you this way every week.
Right.
So that's something that we did early on in my practice before they all started logging into PBN and looking everything up themselves.
Right.
Was we did a sticky note system where we every morning they walked in on Monday morning, there was a sticky note on their computer with the reappointment rate from the previous week.
Mm,
But they were all bought into the reason why we are
right.
wanting that reappointment rate to be high.
Right.
So I feel like that's, I mean, Richard, that feels to me like the most baby level 101 level of leadership is just asking them to do things and knowing how to correct them, right? Like you could say the same thing with the room setup. Like when I walk into the room, I need it to be efficient so that I can move on and check hygiene and like the whole thing. So it needs to be set up properly. Like all of that stuff, you can say everything the same way.
Right. And I think it's so much easier to have follow-up conversations around it when you've laid that foundation of why.
Yes.
Versus they were never bought in the first place. And so now when you're correcting them,
Yes.
you're like, did they forget? Do they not know how? Do they not understand why it's important? You're trying to you're trying to figure out like, why is this person failing to do this thing that I've asked them to do? You need this foundation first.
And I think it's really cool because and right, like I'm the leader of two businesses and I have two different sets of teams and they both report to me the same feedback. And so from your experience, is this something that you feel like, I feel like at Shared Practice we do this well, right? Like whenever we're working on a project, everyone is very clear on the purpose behind what we're doing before we ever talk about what it is we're doing.
Agreed. Yep. No, and that is something that I think has driven a lot of our success too, is that we're bought into the why and why this is important. A lot of the times we just struggle because it's something new that we haven't done and we're having to figure stuff out. And
everything's
so that's
new.
the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all new.
But back to the practice, right? You can look at it and it's almost like when like a crown prep that turns into an endo. If you tell the patient beforehand that it's going to be an endo and then it turns into an endo, like you're the hero. But if you tell the patient afterwards, you're just explaining away stuff. Totally. It's the same thing here. It's if you get them bought into the reason behind doing something
before you've even asked them to do it,
it's a much smoother thing and you're not retroactively trying to repair it. You look like you're the guy trying to prevent issues normally everything you do in your practice should have some good reason behind it.
Right.
Like I can't think of anything I've ever asked my staff to do that was like just terrible for patients and them and me. Like, why would I ever do that thing? Totally. It's pretty easy you got to get them bought into what you're trying to accomplish before you tell them what it is you want them to do to accomplish that thing. So I feel like that's the most basic level of leadership. And that's just like, that's very solo, right? I got like 5 or 6 staff members. I'm the only dentist. Everyone does their job. It's clearly defined roles and expectations. I think that's kind of the next area where this breaks down is clearly defined roles.
Okay.
Right.
Let's talk about that. So is there any examples that you can share from either you or from a coaching client of going to more team members? You've gone from a smaller size to a larger size, and all of a sudden people lack clarity and it's come to a head.
Yeah, front office. So when we went from, so I bought a practice with 2 front office and they're great. Both of them still have them. They're awesome, amazing employees. There was a time where they had conflict over who does what. And this is a very common 2 front office practice problem is who does what. So now I know how to tell them what to do in a nice way that, has them bought into the reason. But when I have multiple employees sharing functions, that's the next area where I think things break down. It's clearly defined roles and expectations. So what I had them do is I had them sit down, and what we did was we clearly outlined all of the things that we do as a front office. So I had them both write down, what do you do and what do you do and what still needs to get done.
Right.
And then we delegated things. And the key is with front office people. And this is where I got some flack for something I said on Practice Underwater, where I said I don't like cross-train people. It's for this reason. So I like to have like right now we have 4 people up front of my practice. There's no crossover in functions.
Mm,
Everyone, there's like all the things that need to get done, they get split up and everyone has their list. And typically there's not overflow, there is backup. So like if the phone rings, we have person 1 answers, and then if she's busy, then person 2, then we have person 3, and then we have person 4, and we have the hunt group very clearly outlined. But you have, for example, if you have your practice in your 2 front office, like who is the one verifying insurance, who is the one confirming the appointment, who is the one, and it's usually the areas where they cross, of like like a new patient comes in, someone puts in new patient form, but who verifies their insurance, and
mm,
then who submits the claim, and there's common areas where people kind of they overlap, and then that's, but when 2 people are accountable for the same thing, nobody is.
right.
And I think that's kind of that next level of leadership, is sitting down with your team members and having clearly defined expectations. And if it's a hygienist, you say, hey, I expect you to come 15 minutes before your shift. I expect you to leave 30 minutes afterwards. I expect you to employee handbook type stuff, right?
Totally.
I expect you to, every appointment, I want you to take intraoral photos. I want you to take x-rays. Like, this is how we do things, and this is what I expect of you. I feel like that's like 202 level of leadership, is all of your staff know this is what he wants from me,
Mm.
or she, if you're listening as a woman dentist.
So, and part of this is that when it's a smaller team, like there's almost not enough volume of stuff to be done. I mean, there's always
Yes.
a ton of volume, but it's like once there's enough new patient flow that's like someone's almost entire job is kind of intake and reception, and it becomes a lot more messy than when it's just a small team. So, and the growth factor of it, of going from one person who used to do everything to 2 people to 3 people to 4 people, you're having to have this conversation multiple times
Yes.
rather than just once.
Well, and I think, like, right, our philosophy is explosive growth. And I think a whole another episode that hopefully we can do with, I'd be happy to do, but I feel like Suzanne, our director of coaching, would be an amazing person to do this episode with, is, the effect of scaling that has on a front office.
Mm,
If we talk about it, you have one person at the front, they do everything. And then you split them up. So you have a scheduling coordinator and a treatment coordinator. And then you have like a scheduling coordinator, treatment coordinator, and then insurance coordinator / office manager.
mm,
And then you then go, we have in scheduling coordinator, treatment coordinator, insurance coordinator, and office manager. And like
right,
that process of going from 1 to 4 front office, like, yeah, you're divvying up duties a lot of different times.
right,
And you're going to go through them not liking working together, and then learning to work together, and all of the things that happen. That's what, growing from 600 to 2 million looks like. And we talk a lot about the ways we do it, but that's the effect that your leadership, every time you got to redefine roles and responsibilities, and everyone has to be clear on what they're expecting. And I feel like that's like level 2 of leadership, is, does everyone on their team know what you expect of them?
right. So then what would you say is the next level? Is that, do you feel like this most recent round of, all the biggest problems filtering up to you type thing is that next level, or is there a level in between?
No, I feel like right now I'm still, in my mind, I'm still at 6 7 employees.
Okay.
I think once you start getting 2 front office, 2 hygienists, 2 assistants, that's when you'll start running into this issue we just talked about, of roles, responsibilities, and clearly defined expectations. The next step is, once you start getting an associate / office manager, that
Mm,
to me is like that next level of leadership, where it's leadership when you're not there.
right. Stuff getting completely handled start to finish without you having to make a decision on it one way or another,
Yes.
and, uh, ultimately, you need to be removed from that decision, for it to run smoothly and effectively, because if you're the bottleneck for all of the quote unquote "important decisions," and that's the hard part, is that people feel like, "Oh, well, this is important enough. I need, the head boss to make this decision." So delegating authority almost.
And so you're almost there, exactly. Like you're talking about, you'll quickly realize what about the practice's success is dependent on you.
Mm,
And so you're talking about it from like a leadership perspective, but there's like a level in between that, where it's the things that go well in the practice, like case acceptance.
mm,
Does that still go well when you remove yourself?
okay.
Or patient experience? Did they still have a good experience when you're not there?
Right,
Did the staff still come on time when you're not there?
right.
all of those things broke down for me when I stopped once I got a full-time associate and I started taking some days off and I cut down to 3 days. Those days when I were not there were like really chill. George isn't here, like days,
Right, right.
and can they remain the same?
That's
That
hard.
that's hard. And then
Yeah.
that next level is what you just talked about, right? Like, can decisions get made without you?
Okay. So can we maintain the same standards without me is number 1.
Yeah, I
And
think
then
that's like I would say level 3
level 3.
is
And then
maintain same standards without me.
and then can decisions get made that with those standards in mind to maintain the whole system, hiring people without you, like that's something
Yeah,
that happens at your office now.
yeah. So can I talk about level 3 and then we'll go to 4 and then 5 is probably the last one I've been to,
Okay.
which is culture without you.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and then maybe there's a 6 of like full autonomy. But it's so level 3 for me was difficult. It was I had an associate and I had an office manager, but it's just the basic things were just not happening. I feel like that was a really hard one to get through. Was that next level of going from a solo to like transitioning into a group was and I had a seller as an associate, but a seller as an associate's it's you almost have two owners.
Right.
The staff just does what they're supposed to do because they're a seller. Their old boss is there. So
Totally.
I really felt like I went from one dentist to I felt like my first time having an associate was when my seller retired and I hired an associate.
Okay.
I feel like the seller was almost like the easiest associate in the world. Like I just leave her alone and she does her job and the staff listen and they do what they're supposed to do because that was their old boss.
Right. Totally.
It's very different. An associate is much more like the staff's friend than they are like their boss.
Mm.
And they're another employee, and then you have to like worry about their expectations and everything. And yeah, that's again, it's just that extra layer of redefining expectations and setting people accountable to like an office manager when someone comes late. Like you got to have the conversation with them. They got
Right.
to know. You got to have a step by step like verbal warning to firing process in there, and everyone has to know what you expect of them. That's when I introduced an employee handbook. It was at that step. And I think the thing that I actually got this question. I was Tyler's dental student group, what they call the TPO task force is his group coaching program that he's doing.
Right.
I was doing a call with them, and one of them asked, like, "You're talking about these steps of growth. So, like, if my plan is to be a group, do I like arrange all of this stuff when I have like 4 employees?" And I was like, I kind of am off the mindset, and maybe I could get your opinion on this, Richard. I tend to let things break before I fix them.
Hmm.
So I tend to wait until my practice is telling me I need to implement a structure before I implement the structure.
I think the wisdom in that is that you can get really caught up in building unneeded structures and like in this loop of like just adding stuff for the sake of adding stuff for future problems that don't exist yet. And in reality, you need to be focused on growing. Like
Yes,
that's the thing that requires your attention. Um, so no, I agree. I think it makes sense that and it's also hard to predict where things are gonna break.
totally. I think every time it's broken, and again, every level of leadership we're talking about is a very stressful time in ownership for me that was very taxing on me that I had to level up to get past it. And you don't know when those are coming.
Right.
They just kind of show up.
Totally.
And so I tend to be of the mindset, and this is very against probably most people's advice, but the hard part about this strategy is you have to deal with some chaos
Right?
because it's much easier to prevent things than deal with them. Like, right, I have to clean up a mess and then implement some type of structure to prevent the mess from happening next time,
Right.
as opposed to just preventing the mess in the first place. But you then are really positive that it needs to get done.
Yeah. Well, it also comes back to our overall philosophy of what is the bottleneck that
Yes.
is keeping me from going to the next stage, and not worrying about 3 bottlenecks from now. It's
Yeah.
like worry about the current bottleneck, fix that, and worry about what's holding you back right now so that you can move on to the next step.
And the vulnerable piece of this is every step of the way, and this still happens to me. Um, I make them mean something. Every time there's a point of chaos, I make it mean something. And this most recent point of chaos that really sparked this whole episode, I made it mean that my plan of having shared practices and going into my practice very little wasn't going to work.
Mm.
And you have to, it's hard to not make it mean something. And previous versions of this were I made it mean that I wasn't good enough, or I made
Mm,
it mean that I was a bad owner or a bad boss or a bad leader. And I remember, back when Justin was my coach during my first year of ownership, I would tell him like, I feel like a bad leader.
right.
And he would be like, no, like this is just normal. And that's the part that I want our audience to feel like is okay. It's okay to feel like a bad leader. That just means you need to level up. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're actually a bad leader. It just means your practice is presenting to you. Your practice is a mirror on your leadership. Always.
Well, and I think the thing that people do is they want to avoid this uncomfortable situation, so they
Yeah.
don't change stuff. They leave it alone, they don't address stuff, they don't grow because as soon as you change things, as soon as you're asking your team to do something different, there's going to be pain, there's gonna be challenge, and so people just keep going the way they've been going.
And Richard, we were talking about this in Monterey. One thing that you feel about me is that I'm really good at taking feedback.
Mhm.
And I came to Monterey feeling really down on myself about my ability to take feedback because I had gotten a lot of it recently. And I think the part that I was trying to get rid of was I was trying to make it so the feedback stopped hurting.
Right.
And this is, we're talking about the chaos in your practice telling you need to change something as feedback, right? Whether it's employees complaining or something, some sign that something isn't working. Um, and I think you really helped me realize that during that talk that we had over there, where it's like, it's okay if it hurts. That means that you care.
Right.
And so during these moments, you might not love them, but that's okay.
And I think that's why you are good at taking feedback is because you let it hurt. You do care and you wanna get better and you can see and pivot rather than holding on to and defending yourself and saying, "Well, I did it because of this, and this." You're like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, let's change that. Let's do something else." So that full, like, absorbing it and then internalizing it, embracing the pain, and then moving forward, it's a painful cycle, and it never
Yeah.
stops being painful.
It doesn't stop being painful. Ask me how I know. Yeah. It's been a
Yeah,
lot of these. And, that was the call I made to Richard was like, this sucks. It hurts.
totally.
Help. And, on a side note, thanks for taking the call
Of
and
course,
having the talk with me.
of course.
But it's so anyway. Moving on. That was level 3. Was setting up some level of accountability structure that doesn't involve you, so that things can continue to happen while you're not there.
Mm.
Now that next level for me was team leads. So this
And
was actually about 6 or 7 months later. So
mm,
between 3 and 4 for me was about 6 or 7 months later. My practice was growing a lot, and I started having once I got 4 hygienists. I had 4 hygienists, 3 assistants, and 3 front office. That was when it was apparent that I needed to stop becoming the person that direct communicated to everybody.
mm.
And so we developed team leads.
And we did a whole episode on this with Alex Sharp, like 2 or 3 episodes ago,
Oh, perfect.
um,
So
where we
all
talked
around level 4 of leadership.
level 4
But
where
we're
you're
talking about level 4.
yeah, traction, we're about team leads, about building these leadership infrastructures and empowering your team and trusting them.
Cool. So we won't go back through that. But I think it's you know, for me, and it's funny because like you have to learn to like give which team members are the right fits.
Yeah,
That's a whole thing. And then watching them and empowering them. And then your leadership turns into coaching the leaders in your team.
mm,
Right. I mean, when I go into my practice, all of my conversations are with my leads about their leading the practice. And you're almost coaching them through leadership. And it's a really cool phenomenon, to be honest.
so there's this scene in, Better Call Saul,
Hmm.
where so this is it's a really off-brand example. I'm talking about drug dealers here.
I
So,
love Better Call Saul. Keep going.
oh,
This is my
I
this is my show.
so it's where Nacho is in the back with, who was the crazy Salamanca who, like, gets shipped off to jail in, like, season 2? Sorry,
Oh, is
not a
this?
spoiler alert. So if you guys have not seen Better Call Saul and you intend on listening to, just plug your ears for the next 2 minutes. No,
Um,
there's no
I know who you're
spoilers.
talking about. I know. Is it Hector? I thought Hector's the guy that rang the bell.
Yeah, he's the bell guy.
Yeah.
His
Anyway, I know which one. I know which Salamanca you're talking about. The one that goes down to Mexico, and then eventually, yeah. I know exactly what
yeah,
you're talking about.
the crazy one.
Yeah.
So he sits in the back while Nacho is in the front, with the individual drug dealers that come in off the street and they
Yeah.
like have the money, and the crazy one has to call out Nacho on his holding the street level drug dealers accountable. And then eventually Nacho is in the back, like in a later season,
Yeah.
like he's the one listening as the drug dealers come off the street. But it's this interesting, like the leader in the back isn't doing anything. They're kind of just there the whole time while the like
I don't think you
intermediary.
spoiled anything of value in the show, so I think you're
No,
good.
I think we're good. But it was instructive because
Yeah.
they're not there to, like, step in and do the job, but they are there when that intermediate leader is not holding someone accountable, is letting someone off easy, is not doing their job fully to take them aside and not beat them, we're
Yeah.
not drug dealers, but, encourage and instruct and help coach through, "Okay, this is how you handled this. Here's another way that you could have said it or done it, or, I really need you to follow up and do this." Um,
And this is where I would even throw associates in here, right? You're teaching them how to present dentistry, how to talk to patients about things, how to do certain procedures. Like that's this level of leadership as well. Plus, like a lot of times your leads, you've taken them from being an equal to their peers to putting them in a position of leadership, and usually that's initially uncomfortable for them.
yeah, for them and for their peers,
Yeah,
both.
and you
Well,
have to coach them through, this is how you talk to your fellow employee about this thing, and you coach them on having those conversations. And for me, I'll always say it, and I talk about it at shared practice too. If I spent all my time as the leader of a company coaching and mentoring the people I'm empowering, then that's very effective, right?
mm,
Like that's an incredibly effective use of your time.
right.
If the whole time that I'm spending on my practice is empowering my leadership team, like then I'm in a good spot.
That's what you should be doing.
Yeah. So that's at level 4 of leadership is it's almost like helping the accountability structures to start going through that leadership team, kind of
Yeah.
like what Alex was talking about. And I feel like level 5 is culture. It's and this for me was post COVID. So if we think of leadership team, I got my leads in place in November of 19, and I think things were sailing pretty smoothly. And you notice that these like they start becoming more spread out. These because right as you get better and as you improve, then your issues start becoming more spread out. But it was post COVID. I went from 3 days a week to 1 day a week,
Yeah.
and that was a big drop off.
Yeah. It's a big
And
shift.
what happened was, and I was preparing to go, and at that time I was already aware of the fact that I was ready to go to like no days.
Mm,
So what I noticed, what happened was that my culture was really, it was the days that I were there, everyone was in a good mood, having a good time. And the days that I wasn't there, it was like grumbling and just kind of like, mm. And so it was like a lack of connection and camaraderie.
mm,
And so when I implemented the fact that, so I was very careful when I implemented the fact that I'm not going to be there very often. We had to have two things in place. One was feedback mechanisms. So when any employee in my practice is disgruntled, there has to be a way for that issue to be effectively handled quickly without me.
mm.
So that was further empowering an office manager, my office manager, to really handle a lot of those issues. And then on the same token, kind of making it a priority to connect as a team. As your team gets bigger, we're split shifting, people aren't there as much anymore, and that connection as a team is still very important. So we implemented happy 2 hours. Um, so
Yeah.
it's once a month on Wednesdays from 4 to 6. We have dinner and drinks, and we have a good time as a team. And we have our first one in a week. So that we scheduled that out, and something we've done because I think that's important too. Is that you need to have that connection as a group. So though, I think it's just that's when it starts getting challenging. At least that's when it's like very. If you noticed, Richard, as you level up, things get a lot more tangible or a lot
Yeah.
less tangible.
It's kind of vague.
It starts getting really vague.
Well,
Um,
it's things that you can't directly impact. It's not like
yes.
something you can just go in and fix. It's like, "Hey, here's this system, fix the problem." Um, yeah.
Yeah, but it's identifying these breakdowns and why is culture unhealthy, and then getting feedback from your team around. Like, I think I'll once a week ask one employee how the culture is of the practice.
Mm.
I'll usually be talking to like, how's culture around here? How does it feel when I'm not here? I'll ask somebody that.
Mm,
And
that's a great question.
I made it very clear to them. I said, what's not negotiable to me is culture. I said, my job is to make sure that when I'm not here, culture, the things that you guys enjoy about working for me remain here.
Mm,
And so I want my staff to feel like they work for me even when I'm not there. Like I'm so happy that, he is my boss. Like that,
right.
I want them to have that sentiment even when I'm not at the office.
Totally.
And that's that next level of how do I instill that sentiment in my team when I'm not there?
And with that, for me, one of the important things for my culture and what I'm thinking about is this a better place to work this year than it was last year?
Yes.
Are our systems better? Are we able to take care of patients better? Everything along the way, have I given you more skills? Have I improved the overall, like, purpose and meaning of our practice? And if the answer is no to that, then I've got work to do.
And I think that puts, I feel like when I hear that, I put a lot of pressure on it because for me, like, I want it to be just as good if they already liked it. And I think the question I ask is, do you see yourself working here for the next 10 years?
Right.
Barring moving or
Barring
anything.
life
Yeah.
change circumstances,
But
yeah.
like, if you're still going to be doing this, what I tell my staff is, I want you to be here as long as you're doing this. I don't tell everyone that, but the ones that I want doing there for as long as they're doing this, that I tell them that. And I want to make sure they want to be there as long as they're doing this.
Yeah.
And that's something that you need to ask them, and that needs to remain while you're not there. And
Mhm.
for me, like immediately post COVID, was I want things to remain awesome even when I'm not here.
Totally.
And then that last level, the reason why I called you was I also don't want to deal with all the issues, right? Like I told myself, I initially I told my team that I would deal with personnel issues. That would be my job, was people issues, and then I quickly determined that that was not what I want to do. And so then it was I also want all the staff management stuff to not go through me, and I want my 3 hours there to be connecting with the people that I enjoy spending time with and seeing them and having fun, and it further empowering your team to handle that stuff without you. That's part of it. And then the other part for me was also accepting the fact that there will always be chaos. I think you reach a size where there's just an acceptance of chaos versus the
Mhm.
attempt to prevent chaos. And for
Totally.
me, I feel like acceptance was a big part of this last breakthrough for me, was accepting chaos and almost laughing at it and be like, bring it on. And so I went in with my team, and last couple of weeks we've been joking around about the fact that like we're going to continue to grow. We're going to have a lot more people here, and it's going to be even more hectic and crazy and wild. And this is our new normal. So like, buckle up, let's have fun.
Yeah.
And that's kind of now it's our culture. And then nothing's gone wrong in the past 2 weeks, and it's almost weird. It's not like
Yeah.
I think that I've solved the problem of culture forever. It's like, nope, it's
It's
just
like,
for the next 2 weeks.
okay,
Um,
what's gonna happen tomorrow? And, like, something
yeah,
doesn't happen tomorrow, you're like, "Well, it's gonna happen the next day."
and
Yeah.
actually, now that I think about it, I'm actually wrong. There is stuff going on. I just forgot about it because it doesn't.
Doesn't feel as
Yeah,
big.
it just feels normal, and I
Yeah.
think that's the next step. I don't know what level 7 is. I'll
We'll
get there
find
at
out
some
soon.
point.
Yeah.
But it's it's every step of the way. You have to. Well, actually, I think I might know what that is. At some point, I have to replace the visionary in the practice. Like at some point, there will be a position that is almost currently mine, but like like a further empowered office manager or a further empowered leader of the practice, to almost assume ownership on site when I'm not there. I think
Yeah.
that's the next level. And it doesn't have to be direct partnership or whatever. It can be but that feeling of ownership on site. That's probably the next level for me. But you know, it's crazy because that's it's a lot of growth. And I think that if you think about it, what did we have that episode in January, where I talked about leadership development and personal development are hand in hand. Can't have
Yeah.
one without the other. Like
Totally.
you don't go from your issues being an uncomfortable conversation with a hygienist around reappointing to, you know, level 6, 7, 5 stuff without a lot of personal growth.
Yeah.
And that
With
bleeds over to the rest of your life. Like for me, it didn't lead to a divorce, but it led to me realizing that a divorce was the right thing for me and
and
being
a
able to
lot
do
of
that.
this just has kinda coincided, and you've surrounded yourself with coaches and life coaches and therapists and
Yeah.
all the above to get through all of these because your ability to process through each one of these and embrace and move forward, it goes back to the rate limiting step. It's you as the leader.
Yeah. It's going to sound very vague to a solo practice owner whose success is so dependent on their case acceptance and everything and their production. But for me, and really both of the businesses, that I lead, the success of both businesses is more closely tied to my mindset and my ability to think through things and manage my fear and make clear, conscious decisions than probably anything else. And it's a really weird spot where your mind is the biggest thing that leads to success. But it really is, and I think that's I mean, for me, I spend like people think that, like, obviously, right, we hugely believe in coaching, like we sell it, we're really big on it. I spend like high five figures a year on all of those things.
Right.
Like developing my mindset and my leadership skills, that's like a $70,000 a year thing that I spend.
Right.
And that's how much I believe in it. So it's
That's crazy when you put it together like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably my running total year to date
for 2020.
Yeah.
In a COVID year. That's how much you've
Yeah.
spent on mindset and development.
Right, but, like, when I say I believe it, like,
Yeah.
we
You're living it.
mastermind, coaching department, everything we do is to try to bring all of that stuff at, like, a much lower price point where someone can actually justify it through the growth of their practice. Like, I think for me, it's sometimes hard to justify on a monetary level, the
Right.
amount that I spend on this stuff, but we try to offer that same benefit.
And interestingly, each time you level up, to be able to receive that next level of coaching and of mastermind and community, some of the organizations that you're joining and the masterminds that you're in that aren't even dental. George is in some
Oh, yeah, I'm non-dental at this point, yeah.
high level masterminds and groups of entrepreneurs and executives that are doing big things on a grand scale. Every time you go up, it gets more expensive.
For sure.
Right.
But I think the value of it though, right? You like, and it's funny. I never once thought that, so I've said this before, and I said this even, I was in, so EO is the name of that organization you're referring to, of like entrepreneurs with 7-figure businesses. And, I talked to one of the members, she has this like, 8-figure company. And I was telling her, I was like, um, I feel like personal development and leadership development are so closely linked that you can't have one without the other. And she goes, you would be so surprised how many people in this group have, 20, $30 million businesses, yet are like drowning in their personal life because of it. And
Yeah.
and it's funny because I interviewed Alex Sharp, you just talked about him, for Practice Underwater. And he had, his practice was doing like, over 2 million without like any leadership structure whatsoever. No office manager, no team leads, nothing. And you can get there. Like, you can grow without the stuff. But the feeling of it, the chaos, the hectic nature of it, there's no ease to it.
Yeah. The
And
experience.
it's that ease that you, like, yesterday I was in a, between, I just actually, I didn't realize this until yesterday. We had to introduce ourselves. We did a day-long training, and at 7 a.m, they tell you to come in and turn off your phone. And so I turned off my phone yesterday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And
was this for EO?
Yeah, this is for EO. And so every time you go into a meeting, you have to turn off your phone.
Wow.
And their meetings, their shortest meeting that I do is monthly. It's 5 hours long.
Holy
and so
cow.
it's so cool because you shut off your phone and you're thinking, oh my gosh, who needs me? Who's going to contact me? Who's this? And you have to have that structure in place where you can turn off your phone for a whole day and it'll be okay.
Right.
And so I let Suzanne know, I let Matt know, I let my office manager, Cindy, know. I said, hey, I'm going to be in a training. My phone's going to be off all day. You have the autonomy to do what you need to do. And it was it was the first time I've ever done that. It was so cool to have my phone off all day. And just sitting there in a conference room and only worrying about what's going on in that conference room and having no connection to, that's such a very foreign concept, which is horrible that that's such a foreign concept to us.
I don't know if I should be offended or proud that you didn't have to let me know.
Yeah.
See, I don't know if that's next level leadership or no. I'm just kidding.
Well, the funny thing is, I thought about who are the people that contact me that I'd be worried about you
Right.
know. And the guy who led it, he goes, he has this dance studio in Denver that has like it's a huge dance studio, and it's like a, and he's like, I mean, I get on flights and I go a few hours without cell service. Like, why is this so foreign to people? And it's but if you really want to get high up in leadership, you have to have that structure underneath it, or else, I mean, can you imagine, you know, there are 30 people that report to me in some capacity.
Mm,
Like if I didn't have any structure of leadership, all they'd be doing all day is answering questions.
totally.
And I couldn't do any of the things that I actually need to do.
Yeah.
You have to have that structure for it to be an enjoyable experience.
Oh, this is awesome. No,
I feel like this was one of our best episodes.
this was, and
This is outro time.
yeah. Uh, there was a similar podcast that I listened to about a guy who developed some software, and he went from being a software developer to this, being the CEO or the president of a company of 130 people, and how many different points he had to go through this
Yeah.
transformation and change, and the level of problems, the types of problems, and he's like, I didn't realize how hard every step would be in
Yes.
terms of personal transformation, uh, changing who I was as a leader, and, he's like, you can't know that beforehand until you get into it."
And it's cool because I think, I'd hope that you all listening will look at the trajectory of your practices and this conversation. Sure, it's intimidating, right? We just talked about all the pain you're going to go through emotionally. But and for me, the most like amazing part of leading businesses is when you've empowered somebody and they've gotten to a level of leadership or a personal growth or something that they never thought was possible for themselves, and then they see themselves thriving in the role, and that's including you, the leader.
Right,
I think if I were to think back to myself 2 years ago, walking into this practice, being uncomfortable. I mean, 2 years ago, I was uncomfortable to have a conversation with a hygienist about using an intraoral camera.
right.
And I think 2 years from now, this is my life and these are my current issues. Like that growth and development, it's super exciting. I mean, it is obviously a lot of pain, but like, what's the whole thing? No pain, no gain.
Yeah,
Like, this is just emotional pain, but it will still feel uncomfortable. It'll still hurt. And the thing that I'd like our audience to take away from this is it will happen. That just means there's a breakdown, and feel the pain. It's okay. Don't make it mean that you suck or that you're not good at your job or that, your goals are not possible. Just mean that there's an issue that you need to address. You address the issue and then you continue to move on.
so let's tease the next episode. We were thinking about topics before the call. We talked about the physical infrastructure, the real estate, how much space you actually have to work with, and including parking, Ashley. And
By the way, we solved the parking problem. We'll talk
did
about it
we?
next time. Yeah.
Okay, that'll be great. Specifically, and we won't get into it now, but like if someone bought a practice with 5 or 6 ops and they realize all of a sudden I want to be a group practice, how are they going to then execute that? How do you grow a practice where you're going to run into physical space limitations really quick, and how soon do you have to make these decisions? And all of this goes back to why it's so important to know what you want and what your vision is when you're buying a practice or starting a practice in the first place.
So this is such a good topic, and this really deserves its own episode, because it's funny. Of all of our coaching clients, so many of them are running into this issue now. I
Mm,
mean, we have James is a client that I'll talk about since he's been on Practice Underwater. He started with 5 ops. We then equipped 2 more to 7, and now we're going to be getting 9. And so it's and every step of the way, he's like, I didn't think I'd need them this fast.
mm.
And our philosophy and our coaching philosophy, and our practice management philosophy leads to this explosive growth and then presents all these issues. We talked about the leadership issues. Hopefully you and Suzanne will talk about the front office issues, but then there's also the space issues. It's definitely a needed episode.
'Kay. Well, that will be our next episode. This was fantastic. I absolutely love this, George. Thank you again.
You're very welcome. Thanks, man.
Okay, talk to you later.